Hi. So this summer, Cindy Sherman Bishop and we collaborated on a course called Alternative Realities. Northeastern University has a program called Dialogues of Civilization, where students spend 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks, traveling and learning away from home. And so we spent 3 weeks in Toronto doing studio work in virtual reality and augmented reality. And then we crossed the pond to go to Sheffield Documentary Festival, which has one of the most amazing exhibitions of nonfiction work that they call alternative realities. So we stole the name from their exhibition. And Cindy and I spent a week with the students, and we started off by teaching them a little bit of art history. They learned about E. Debord and the Situationist International. Guy came up with this concept called psychogeography, which he explained as the study of the precise laws of the specific effects of geographical environment, consciously organized or not, on the emotions and behaviors of the individual. And he developed this concept known as the derive, where you travel through space without direction, without a map, following either interesting prompts or whatever your urges are. And so the students went out and did their urban explorations, and then they mapped those explorations, and this is one of their sketchbooks, because they had to draw a psychological map of Toronto, not a geographical map. They were learning the difference between space, geography, and place, which is psychological. Next slide. And so then they were sent out into the city to do a series of videos and interviews and really get to know the city from an idiosyncratic, psychological, and emotional perspective. And they were also spent some time with Amy Lavender Harris, who wrote a book called Imagining Toronto, looking at the history of how Toronto has been imagined through literature and poetry. And this was their preparation to work on their augmented reality project that Cindy will tell you about. We also traveled to Sheffield Documentary Festival, and there students had an opportunity to see some really interesting works, next slide, including a work that you really should see if you haven't seen, called Terminal 3 by Asad Malik. This is a HoloLens experience where you're put in the shoes of a Homeland Security interviewer, where you're interviewing somebody entering the United States who's been in a country that we have a travel ban with, and you're playing the role of an investigator deciding whether this person who claims to be an American should be allowed into the country or not. And so the students, after doing 3 weeks of studio work in Toronto, had an opportunity to learn from the makers of these various projects. And now Cindy's going to tell you about their studio work.
Right. All about the texture of the place and space. This is David's, he turned me onto this term, psychogeography. I want to call it psychography because it's such an interesting term in terms of feeling the place and space and what augmented reality can really give us. You are unlocking content by where you go. There's visible information out there. There's something like a menu, but there's invisible information just around us in Cambridge. There's so much information that we don't know anything about. There used to be a confectioner's row right over here. In fact, up the street at Ames Street that I'll show you, it used to be a chocolate factory. Anyway, so texture, right? Thinking texture. What can AR give us? Typically, it gives us knowledge transfer, personalized services, and also voice of the product. I particularly am really interested in knowledge transfer. So what we did, one of the talks we did up in Toronto is we were trying to figure out where is AR most helpful? Where are the problems? What are the solutions? So, for example, Syrian families, they come to Toronto. They don't necessarily have a great way of making an income. They've lost everything. One solution is, hey, we don't necessarily need a working visa in order to create meals for our people, for our neighborhood. They could come and buy our meals, and we can make a little bit of money. It creates a really cool neighborhood connection. Problem. The women come in, they make the food, and then they leave. And then the food comes up through essentially what is a paper bag. So all of a sudden, this paper bag is a point of transfer between these women who are making these meals, who are trying to provide for their families, and the neighborhood. What is it that we can do to make that connection stronger? Because currently, right now, this business enterprise is not viable. So what the students basically did was create an AR experience where you, as the buyer of the food, can sit there and listen to Farouk tell you about what she put into the cucumber salad, which is the best in the world, right? Like, it's a really endearing way to connect people that wouldn't otherwise be able to be connected. The Media Lab here at Civic Media, we typically try to look at how to create creative modes of engagement, civically focused. So right now what we're doing is we're looking at Cambridge. Instead of Toronto, we're going to look at Cambridge. We're going to see what kind of content we can come up with. Once upon a time, there was redlining in Cambridge where you couldn't get a home loan unless you looked a certain way. That has far-reaching effects to today, where you have skyrocketing rents, and the people who bought them were able to buy these homes 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and are able to make quite a lot of money, and nobody can buy there. So there are many people in the MIT community who actually cannot live in Cambridge due to the exorbitant cost here. So one of the things that we're interested in is reaching out to local shops, coffee shops, supermarkets that are mom and pop shopped, and think about how we're going to encourage them to or help their business and stay viable in this world of the corporate enterprise. Another interesting experience that happened in Toronto was these kids went and explored convenience stores. The convenience stores has now been co-opted or taken over by the multinational 7-Elevens and CVS's. Once upon a time, mom and pop shops were basically local banks. Like, if you didn't have enough money, oh shoot, I'm $5 short of my payday, I can't buy anything, can you loan me some money? Those mom and pop shops, they're like, oh yeah, we've known you and we know your family, and here's a lollipop for your kid, right? Who's going to do that now? If you don't know your neighborhood, if you're not connected and integrated into your neighborhood, that's going to be something that's really quite difficult to experience. So really, we're looking at the texture of a city, the place in the space, and how we're going to connect you more with your neighborhood, more with your community, and make this actually an interesting kind of experience, interesting content to show forth, and to really hopefully address some civic concerns going forward. One of the last things I'll end up with here is the kids who signed up for the AR class in Toronto, or who signed up for the virtual reality class in Toronto, were all about virtual reality. They didn't think much about AR, but once they went through all these the exercises, the machinations, the dialogue, writing out sort of the psychogeographical space. This kid in particular, he had kind of an attitude at the beginning, but he said, to me at least, this is the work that is fulfilling. We were doing good. We were making an impact. So I encourage you to think about AR in that regard. Thank you.